And it was about 20 minutes after that we continued to watch the footage and the buildings burning, and we were, as everyone was, we were kind of in amazement. About 20 minutes after that second impact, we felt the room shake and a boom. Now we're around the corridor from where the impact was, but we were one wedge away. And it really didn't seem like that loud of a boom or that big of an impact, but still it was apparent that something had exploded. When we went into the back alley, we saw the smoke pillowing over the corridor 1, and it was apparent that something had exploded. We weren't, oddly enough, it didn't cross through my brain that another plane had flown into us. I thought that a generator had exploded, or anyway, it was still mind-baffling that they had actually tried to attack the Pentagon with a plane. Well, I teamed up with them and we walked around the edge of the building to take a closer look at the damage. And we got about 100 yards away from the impact, and we were still pondering what could have happened because there was no visual signs of air wreckage of any kind. It was just a big burning hole in the building. There was no wings, there was no passenger seats, there was nothing laying about. So we thought that maybe it was a generator, maybe someone fired a handheld rocket missile from the highway. And then some military came up and gathered all the military together, and they wanted to make a human wall to walk people off the grass, because apparently we were standing on evidence. And when I looked down at the grass, I noticed there were tiny fragments of metal, about quarter-inch size, quarter-inch squares and smaller, spread out through the grass. And so we were in fact standing on the remnants of the plane and other items, I guess. And I'll never forget this conversation I had with a black officer, and I won't tell you what military branch he was with because I don't want to get him in trouble. But we were walking side by side, and he said to me that he didn't think this would ever have happened had we not let Florida get away with a crooked election. Now, what context that has in reality, I don't know. But on that day, it echoed in my ear to hear an older gentleman with obvious rank and merit pinned on his chest expressing those kind of feelings. This is the point being that any military operation of this sophistication would have planted observers. There certainly was observers on the ground in New York, and I'm not talking about Americans, I'm talking about people that were planned to watch the outcome of their own attack. And military history will provide evidence that you do not go into a major battle such as this without having people on your side that are there to do nothing but observe the results. So it was my belief immediately after leaving the grounds that there were observers walking amongst us. Call me crazy, I've been called it before, the name doesn't bother me, but the notion that if you were to go through years and years of planning an attack, why wouldn't you put observers on the ground to make sure that you got an accurate report back from your own people? That was my belief, and that became my motivation for the rest of the day. I stayed on, walking through the crowd, looking for people that did not look like they were in shock. Let me back up. I was looking for the telephone, and I continued to find no resource for that. As I approached the mall, I saw a young man dressed, like I said, as a college student, dark hair, large nose, about 6 foot tall, and he was talking on his cell phone as I approached him. And I thought, oh my goodness, somebody's gotten through. I'll ask this young man if I can use his phone when he's done. As I approached him, excuse me, he saw me coming up. He finished his conversation and closed his phone. And I said, may I use your phone to call my wife? And he said with a strong Arabic accent, and he was not kind, and he was not sympathetic. And he said with a very strong accent, nothing is working. He didn't say his phone isn't working. He didn't say he can get through. He said nothing is working. Immediately, I thought, well, what a rude bastard. And I took about 3 steps away, and I thought, no, that's more than rude. He said nothing is working, and he was mad. And he didn't appear to be in shock, and he didn't appear to be sad, and he didn't appear to be terrified. He was pissed. A lot of us were pissed. A lot of us were very angry, but none of us were disappointed. And he had an air of disappointment in his voice and in his facial expressions. This has stayed with me for a long time, because I feel as though I may have stumbled across an observer at that point. I took about 10 steps and I turned around, and now I saw the young man speaking to an older man, same facial structure, long gray wavy hair, and they were speaking in a fashion that later on, again, a lot of this could be my imagination, but the body language in this case seemed to be very odd, because they were speaking in a private conversation mode. Both heads were tilted into each other, and they were speaking secretly amongst each other. And as I looked around the crowds, everyone was speaking to each other, but it seemed like I didn't see anybody trying to sneak a conversation or trying to have an extra private conversation. People were speaking loudly. They were speaking out. They were crying. They were yelling. And these two guys were walking down the sidewalk with their heads tilted in towards each other, whispering. Something seemed very odd about that, and I wish I'd have followed those bastards today. Who knows? They might have just been more in control of their emotions than the other 3,000 people that were around us. 30,000 or whatever it was. In any case, that day has loomed with me, I'm sure, as it has with every American, and there are questions that are unresolved. Questions like why those 5 helicopters were taking off after the first plane hit New York. Come to find out, it was the Joint Chiefs of Staff evacuating the building. And I've always believed that the captain was the last one to go down to the ship. And why in the middle of an active war would our leaders leave our biggest fort? The only thing I can come up with without being corrected, and maybe someday I will, I could be signing my own death warrant by bringing these things up, but the only calculation I can come up with on my own is that they determined the Pentagon would or maybe was a target, and they needed to get their best and their brightest out. But they couldn't calculate the man-hour loss if it was a false alarm, so they left us there. Unfortunately, the man-hour loss was much greater by hesitating. They got their important boys out, and they left the rest of us to chance. And that I hold very bitter against this establishment. I continue to work here because I have to provide for my wife and my family. But I think there's a lot more going on here than just a couple of crazy religious bastards.